In this video, we're going to focus on how we can make the font responsive here based on our screen size on load. So meaning, you can see here now we have a big font size. If I change this and I refresh this, let's make the font's screen size smaller. Refresh, you can see the font size changes. And if I make this now like, for example, mobile shape, if I refresh, you can see here the font size reduces itself again accordingly. So let's start to look how to do this. So let's start to look how to change the font size on load based on the screen size in Chart.js. So the first thing what we need to do here is to get a border template, which you can find here on chartjs.com getting started. And this specific link is as well in the description box. Once you're on here, copy this border template here. Copy all of this. And then we're going to paste that in there. I will cut this out and then put this in here. Save. Here, refresh. There we are. Let's maximize the size of the chart. I'm going to say here 80%, save, refresh, there we are. Now what I want to do is I want to change the font size, but the font size should be triggered only once we load this. Meaning that if we are on a smaller font or smaller screen size, maybe you want to have smaller fonts. If you're on a bigger screen like this, we should have larger fonts. So how can we do this? Well, first of all, what we have to do is we have to trigger this part not by default. Because right now it's just a JavaScript file that will be triggered immediately, or basically JavaScript code that's being read immediately and implemented on the screen. So we don't want that. What we want to do is we want to control this. So how do we control this? Well, we can create a new function here. Let's call this function draw chart. And what it does is basically just drawing everything we have here below. And we're all the way to here. Then what I want to do is proper indentation here. Save, refresh. Now as you can see, it doesn't trigger anything at all because it is not loaded, or it doesn't fire this function. So what I want to do is I want to fire the function or trigger it. So how do we do this? To trigger it, we can do it like this, but this is as a default and it will do nothing more. So we'll just trigger it on load immediately, or basically just when the file starts, and once it just reads all the JavaScript. But I don't want this. I want to make sure that it's really on load on the first time. So what we can do here is we're going to say here, we're going to create a basically a trigger here on the window. There's a dot on load. So basically we want to make sure that this will be only triggered when we load this window specifically. And once we did this, what I want to do now is I want to put in this function in here. Save this, refresh. As you can see, it starts to load now. It recognizes it. So we didn't do much really, but basically trigger a function here, a nameless function to be specific. So what we want to do now is we want to change the default font size. So how do we change the default font size? Well, we're going to use the chart, which is the global object within the Chart.js library. And then we're going to say a defaults. And then we're going to say a font size, or font.size. And then by default, the font size is 12 pixels. However, let's make this now 20. And if I save this now, refresh, there we are. So now it becomes a bigger font size. However, I'm not done yet, because what I want to do is I want to divide it. If we have a large screen, we should have large fonts. If we have a smaller screen, we should have the appropriate fonts matching with that. So how do we do this? Well, basically what we can do here is an if statement. And all we're going to do here is, oh well, before I even do the if statement, let's look at how can we measure the font or the size of our screen. What we can do here is window dot inner width. If I do a console log this, you will see now we get the pixels of our width. So now what we're going to do now is show this, save, refresh. And then if you can see here, right now the screen size would be of 1583 pixels. Of course, this is the inner window. And what's the inner window? This is the inner window, calculating from this point to here, only this part, excluding basically this part here. The outer window that I might use in some other videos, which looking backwards, I would probably not recommend. I would say use the inner window instead. And the outer window would calculate from this point all the way to the very end of the browser screen basically. So this is very important. So using the inner window would be the most important one because that's what your viewer or user will see. So now if I refresh this, you'll see we get a different number here. Why? This is only 500 pixels or 553 pixels. So now what I want to do is, if we know the font size based on the inner width of the inner window, or the window inner width, that's probably the right term, what we can do now is create an if statement here. I'm going to say if inner width would be larger or equal to 1000 pixels or 999. In that case, what I want to do here is do this. Cut this, put that there. Else, let's do another one. Else, we're going to make it very simple, and afterwards I'm going to go deeper and deeper. So we're going to say here, put this, and then we put this on 12 pixels. If I save this, you can see here now, this is 12, but if I remove this and now I refresh, this is now 20 pixels. Of course, we can do this now more easily, and let's do some other additional conditions. So we're going to say else if the inner window would be bigger than, let's say, 600 pixels or 666 and smaller than 999. In that case, I want to have only 15 pixels, and let's make this very huge so you can easily see the difference. 18, and then finally we do another else where we have just a simple condition. Put in this. We put in this one here where we put in default of 12. By default, Chart.js uses 12 as a standard font size. So if I save this now, refresh, alright, interesting, we get a mistake here. So let's see whether we are, what's the problem is, uncut syntax error. Of course, probably here, of course. So what is this here? Because what I want to do was, if the window inner width would be larger or equal to 666, and then I have to specify again the inner width because that's the condition, is smaller than 999, which is correct because the inner width here should be like that. So we have no space between there. Save that. Let's do this again. Refresh. So now you see it's 12, and let's change this a bit. You can see here the amount of pixels above, and we should be now here above 666. So if I refresh here, we have a bigger font size, and finally if I remove this and refresh, we get huge font size. And that's basically how you can control the font size on load in Chart.js. So if you enjoyed this video, I have another video which would focus, instead of unloading, on resizing the chart, basically where we re-trigger it and then of course change the font size accordingly based on the screen. So let's look, this is the specific video here on how to make the font size responsive based on the screen size in Chart.js.